what's been happening, your response to what's been happening with the media in the United States since you've returned.
Well, I know where it's very easy to start misrepresenting people and mistranslating them. In this case, not mistranslation, it's just you can selectively choose a sentence, for example, and so you turn a whole interview. For example, the most recent one was with Piers Morgan. I think I said, I don't care if Ahmadinejad or the president of Iran, what he thinks about the Holocaust, which I don't care, but that was in the context of trying to move the debate forward from this point. The point is we're sitting there haggling over whether or not he believes in the Holocaust, and the real issue is we're on the verge of World War III. So what are you talking about, something that happened 65 years ago, when you need to be discussing the very urgent matter of whether or not we're going to war, and what will be the consequence for that region, which the media doesn't want to deal with. You see, what they keep asking the American people is, are you in favor of attacking Iran to prevent them from getting nuclear weapons or enriching basically continuing their nuclear program? And their nuclear program may lead to weapons. We're not sure. At the moment, they don't have weapons, we don't think. But why don't we just preemptively strike them like we did with Iraq? Okay, so most of the American people are in favor of that. Well, what if that meant World War III? If that meant the breakout of World War III and potential nuclear holocaust of millions of people across the globe, not just that region, are they still in favor of taking that risk? Because the media is not asking you that question. So that's really what I want to get across, is that what happens if you strike Iran? You see, this is like, this is again goes back to the preemptive war doctrine, right? You can basically attack a nation and potentially destabilize them, or in this case, they're saying, well, we don't want to destabilize the country, even though we keep saying that the president is crazy and the government the regime was totalitarian and they're abusive. We don't want to destabilize them. What we don't want it to do is to attack their enrichment facilities or military facilities that could have nuclear weapon capabilities. Okay, so they're going to allow you to attack within their borders, their sovereign state, to launch some kind of attack from Israel, Turkey, whether it's America or Israel doing it, and you don't expect that they will respond with something, whether it be mining the Straits of Hormuz, for example. You might spend the next 5 years trying to demine it. Or what if Hezbollah in Lebanon unleashes on Israel 40,000 rockets, and now it becomes a guerrilla warfare, right, issue. And then you get destabilization of the region, not just because between Sunni Shiite fighting in Syria, for example, Lebanon, and with Jews in Israel. And then obviously you have Hamas engaged in this whole battle. Now you've blown up the whole region, all because you preemptively struck a country. No one's asking what happens the day after you do that, you see. All they're saying is to the American people, oh, we can do this, no problem. What happened with Iraq? We thought we could overthrow the dictator there, no problem. Now if you look at Iraq, sure, we got out, but the Sunnis and Shiites there are more aggressive and antagonistic towards each other than they ever were historically. And that's from people who live there. They'll say, we never thought of each other in that regard. We live side by side. But once you start destabilizing countries, sovereign rulers of countries, you unleash a hornet's nest. It's basically saying, well, there's a beehive. Bees are dangerous. Well, if you hit the beehive, they're much more likely to be much more dangerous than if you left the bees alone.
Now, let me ask you something. You were sitting there with Piers Morgan. You just said that what happened was that interview more or less boiled down to this matter of whether or not the president of Iran believed in the Holocaust and whether you asked him that question. What caused this to even be ostensibly a debate or a discussion in that interview?
The Holocaust issue?
Yeah.
Because there's two main things that they keep going after Iran about. One is the denial of the Holocaust. Did the president of Iran deny the Holocaust happened? Whether or not he believes it, I know that his ultimate message is the Holocaust took place in Europe. It was mainly Christians or pagans murdering Jewish people. There might have been some Zionists who actually were supportive tacitly because they wanted that to encourage the Israeli state to be formed. But that's a European matter. And now you're going to basically reestablish the Crusader kingdom. And if you remember the Crusades, as people in that region do, that was a kingdom that was established by the Knights of the West. And they basically established the borders very similar to where Israel is now, from Antioch in Lebanon down to below Tel Aviv, basically towards Gaza in the north of Egypt. And this is basically to secure the shipping route to the east through this Red Sea right in the Gulf. So, to people of that region, the Crusades, this rings a bell. And then you suddenly establish a state called Israel, and the British are very clever in this regard. They put the Jews in charge of running Israel, but it's essentially this Crusader kingdom. It doesn't matter if it's Jews or Christians or who it is, you're establishing a Crusader kingdom exactly where there was one 1,000 years ago. And you don't think people in that region remember this or recognize the consequence? What happened last time? They drove the Crusader kingdom off the mainland back into Sicily and then into Western Europe. So this is a British imperial game. And if the Iranians are opposed to the Israeli regime, that's something that has to be discussed, and that has to be separated from the potential for them to build nuclear weapons, because what they're looking at is not Israel. They're not about to sacrifice their country for the state of Israel. They're looking at Iraq, which has been destabilized by the Americans on their border, Syria, which is currently being destabilized by the Americans, British, Saudis on their border, and Afghanistan to their northeast, which is basically an American military base, but also a very unstable country, and then the Saudi regime, who are their enemies because of the Wahhabi religion, to their south. So basically they are surrounded by enemies and by American military bases. So then you're going to say that the Iranians are the dangerous people here, the villains in this case? Why? Because the president doesn't believe in the Holocaust? Or because the president could hypothetically attack Israel? Well, let's be real. Who's been most aggressive in the last 100 years? It's definitely been the Anglo-American imperialist faction. And I say the Anglo-American because it's really a British imperial politics that you're playing, and Americans don't understand that history.
Let's do a little bit about that because often, again, as a correspondent for Executive Intelligence Review, you know perfectly well, we talk all the time about the issue of the British and the issue of British imperialism, and say that even the present so-called U.S. policy under President Barack Obama is really not his policy. It's really something that he's doing on behalf of British intelligence and the British imperial interests. Now you were just there, and one thing I know about Iran is that people there are very aware of the history of British imperialism. So how do you think Iran and the people that you spoke to there see the present circumstance? Do they understand this British role? And if not, what do they think? And what do you think about what they think?
They don't, and this is actually one thing that I kept trying to emphasize to the politicians I spoke with and to the press whenever I could do interviews. I kept saying, look, this is British imperial politics. By saying down with America, this is a ridiculous slogan because it's not about the American government. The American government is a republic, just like Iran's. We are sovereign. Our people are just as proud of our country as yours are. So don't say down with America, say down with the empire. Start getting into that formulation. It's about imperialism. This is an imperial game, as they should well know, because the British and Russians carved up the country multiple times over the last 150 years, going back to the Great Game, right, between Russia and England, and it had to do strategically with what's called the heartland. Now, Halford Mackinder, who was a geopolitical strategist for the British Empire in the early part of the century, stated it very clearly. This is basically this region that we're talking about, from the Horn of Africa to India in the east, is the underbelly of Russia. It's called the heartland of the world island. He called it the world island because Eurasia, from Germany in the west, Russia, and then China, that whole Eurasian landmass is the essential heart of the world. That's the most populous region, resource rich, and in terms of arable lands, they have everything they need. But so whoever controls this, they said, whoever controls the world island of Eurasia controls the world. That was the British thinking. So what we have to do is constantly prevent nations from allying, from creating alliances, from being able to trade and have a productive industry working in cooperation. And you destabilize the underbelly. And that's been the strategy of the British thrust over the last 150 years, going back to the Great Game for Afghanistan, which is on Iran's border. And Afghanistan is obviously a very amorphic country because there's very little condition for a sovereign state to have ever existed at least not in recent history. It's much more premised on nomadic peoples and mountain peoples. So it's a very difficult state to establish sovereignty. But whereas Iran is actually a nation that's ancient, going back to its imperial roots, and then now just being a sovereign state, it has a tremendous history. So it's a stable balance. If that country is destabilized by these politics, it's a direct threat to the Russian state because this is on their border. And it basically would lead to, the Sunni Shiite split, for example, in internecine warfare, and the potential for that to spill over into the Muslims of southern Russia, for example, and the potential destabilization again of the Russian state, because that's very clear right now with the attacks on Putin taking place currently in Russia.
Okay, so Sean, we're going to take a break right now. We'll be right back after these messages. Don't go away.